So, when you're setting up unit tests with Junit versus PyTest, there's a noticeable difference in how you structure your test cases. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I've seen it can be more declarative in PyTest.
Exactly. The way PyTest uses fixtures to manage setup and teardown makes it really clean. But let's talk about mocking. When we use Mockito in Java, the syntax is so verbose compared to something like Jest for JavaScript.
True, Jest does make it easier to mock functions and objects.
And then there's the whole issue of integration testing versus pure unit testing. It's tempting to just stick everything into a single suite, but that can get messy fast. Especially if you're working on a large code base where dependencies are all over the place.
That sounds like it could lead to a lot of brittle tests.
Absolutely. One thing I always do is ensure my unit tests only cover what they should cover. No external services should be involved unless absolutely necessary. And speaking of which, have you ever had an issue where your tests started failing because some third-party API went down?
Once or twice, yeah?
Right? That's why using tools like WireMock or Mock Server can save your bacon. They simulate the service behavior without actually hitting the real endpoint. Now, another pitfall I see often is developers writing tests after they write their functionality. It becomes a bit of a mess since the original design wasn't necessarily test-friendly from the start.
I guess starting with the tests would help keep things cleaner.
Definitely. Test-driven development isn't just about writing tests first, it forces you to think through your design up front. And let me tell you, once you get into that habit, it's hard to go back to coding without thinking about how you'll verify each piece works correctly.
Sounds like a good practice to adopt then.
Oh, trust me, it is. Plus, it saves time in the long run because you catch issues earlier on instead of letting them fester until they become big problems later. Speaking of catching issues early, do you ever find yourself writing too many mocks in your tests?
Sometimes it feels like there are too many moving parts to properly isolate everything.
Exactly. Over-mocking can definitely lead to brittle tests as well. You want enough isolation so that your test remains reliable even if implementation details change slightly, but not so much that every little tweak breaks half your test suite. Speaking of mocks, have you explored the different techniques for mocking and stubbing? It's amazing how much it can impact the reliability and clarity of your tests.
Yeah, I've used some basic ones, but I'm curious to learn more.
Well, for instance, with Mockito in Java, you can use then-return to specify return values for method calls. This is great when you want to simulate a specific response from a method without calling the actual implementation.
That makes sense. It helps isolate the component being tested.
Exactly! And then there's partial mocking, where you only mock certain methods of a class while leaving others intact. This is useful when you need to test interactions within complex objects.
Partial mocking sounds powerful.
It definitely is. Another technique is using spies. Spies allow you to call the real implementation of a method while still tracking how many times it was called or what arguments were passed to it. This is particularly handy during integration tests where you want to verify that certain operations happened as expected.
Spies seem quite versatile for verifying method calls.
They are. And don't forget about stubs. Stubs are simpler than mocks. They provide canned responses without any verification capabilities. You'd use them when you just need a simple input-output scenario without worrying about whether the right methods were called.
So, stubs are good for straightforward scenarios?
Precisely. For example, if you're testing a function that relies on an external API call returning a user profile, you might just want to set up a stub that returns a predefined profile object every time it's called. This keeps your tests fast and focused on the logic rather than external dependencies.
Using stubs in those cases would make the tests clearer and faster indeed.
Absolutely. The key is knowing when to use each type based on what you're trying to achieve. Mocks give you detailed control over interactions and behavior simulation, whereas stubs keep things simple by providing static data points. Both have their places depending on the context of your test. Speaking of different approaches, have you thought much about the differences between test-driven development, TDD, and behavior-driven development, BDD? Each has its own merits and use cases.
I've heard of both, but I haven't delved deep into how they differ practically.
TDD is all about writing tests before you write the actual code. It focuses on the technical aspects, ensuring that your functions work as intended by breaking down the problem into small, manageable pieces.
That sounds very systematic and helpful for ensuring correctness.
Definitely. BDD, on the other hand, shifts the focus to describing software behavior from the perspective of its users or stakeholders. With BDD, you typically use tools like Cucumber or SpecFlow to write scenarios in a language called Gherkin, which is more readable and accessible to non-technical people.
So BDD seems more about aligning the development process with user expectations?
Exactly. BDD aims to bridge the gap between business interests and technical implementation. It encourages collaboration among developers, testers, and product owners by making sure everyone understands what the software should do from a behavioral standpoint.
That could be really beneficial for complex projects where clear communication is crucial.
Absolutely. In TDD, you might start with a simple assertion like this: function should return true if given a positive number. But in BDD, you'd describe a scenario such as when a customer places an order with valid payment information, the system should confirm the order.
That makes it sound more holistic and focused on end-to-end functionality.
Precisely. While TDD helps ensure that individual units of code work correctly, BDD ensures that these units come together to deliver the desired behavior. Of course, both approaches can coexist within a project. It's just a matter of choosing which one suits your current needs better.